Welcome to all of those of you who have signed in. We're going to wait
Bem-vindo a todos.
10 minutes for some more people to sign in, and then we will get started.
Bem-vindo todos que já se juntaram a esse webinar. E agora a gente só vai aguardar os outros a acessarem para iniciarmos.
Bienvenidos a todos que estás aqui nesse webinar com nós. Estamos esperando todos acessar o webinar e vamos a pensar pronto.
So I still see the number climbing of the number of people who have logged in. We'll wait just a little longer.
Well, thank you for waiting and welcome to our program this evening on preventing youth suicide. I'm Mary Hunter Utt, co-president along with Jean Morrison of the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area. And
Obrigado por aguardar a Liga das Mulheres que Votam do Cape Cod. Eu sou a Mary Utt e juntamente com Tara Vargas, Wallace e Jack Jane, vamos iniciar daqui a pouquinho.
Buenas noches, somos de Cape Cod League Women's Voters. Soy Mary Hunter Utt, co-presidenta junto com Jean Morrison de la Liga das Mulheres Votantes da área de Cape Cod. E vamos pensar no fórum em alguns minutos.
as you've already been able to hear, we are very pleased to be able to provide simultaneous interpretation of this evening's program by Natalia Froy in Spanish and Marinette Matos in Portuguese. And we are about to turn on simultaneous interpretation. You will be prompted to select Spanish or Portuguese at the bottom of your screen.
Bom, como você já deve ter percebido, nós temos muito prazer em ter intérpretes hoje aqui, será simultâneo. Nós temos Natália Frois em espanhol e Marinette Matos em português. Daqui a pouquinho você vai ter a oportunidade de escolher a língua que você quer participar, e aí você vai ouvir só aquela língua.
Entonces, como ustedes han percibido, estamos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea. Tenemos la intérprete Natalia Frois de español y Marinette Matos en portugués, y vamos a activar la traducción simultánea en algunos minutos para español y portugués.
Okay.
That's great. I can't get to it.
Okay.
I can't get to turn on, or then I can't get to the slideshow to advance this.
We're having this. Here we go. Okay.
Right.
This slide gives the instructions for selecting Spanish or Portuguese. If you're prompted in English, the instructions are in the chat, which also gives the Spanish and Portuguese instructions in case you need them later, if you get disconnected or something. So we'll a couple of minutes. Oh, yes, to turn the interpretation on.
And it's letting me do that.
Ok, agora você pode escolher a língua.
Ustedes pueden escoger el idioma ahora, portugués o español.
Yes. Mhm.
I need the interpretation to be turned on so that we can add interpreters.
Okay.
But go ahead, Mary, and we'll continue to work on
Yes,
this. So
well,
we don't.
Thank you, Natalia and Marinetti, and hopefully
Obrigado, Natália e Marinette.
straightened out. And thank you, Diana.
É uma organização política que não tem.
The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages active participation in government. Works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support or oppose candidates or political parties. At the national, state, and local levels, the League supports measures to prevent child adolescent suicide, to remove barriers to health and health care for all, to enact behavioral health initiatives, and to prevent gun violence. This evening, we aim to bring greater understanding to our Cape and Island communities and agencies about suicide among our youth. Barnstable County has one of the highest youth suicide rates in Massachusetts, especially among LGBTQIA+ youth. We are grateful for the partnership of the YMCA Achievers Program and Y Leadership for their invaluable aid in organizing tonight's program. We also welcome the variety of community organizations, schools, families, healthcare providers, and advocates, state legislators, and local officials attending this webinar. Finally, please post any questions you have with your email address in the chat, and we will answer them as soon as possible after the program. And now I would like to introduce this evening's co-host, Tara Vargas Wallace, Director of the YMCA Achievers Program. After working more than 20 years in human resources, Tara founded Amplify POC, Cape Cod in 2021, a racial equity nonprofit focused on reducing the racial wealth gap in communities of color. She is active with the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, MAWOC, the local NAACP, and the MLK Junior Action Team. In 2020, she was awarded the Unsung Hero Award by the Barnstable County Human Rights Advisory Commission, and she was a 40 under 40 award winner from the Cape and Plymouth Business Magazine. Welcome, Tara.
Tara hasn't been able to join yet, so can we start with the youth panelist, and we'll get Tara on as soon as we can.
Good afternoon, everybody. I apologize for the challenges with this webinar, and I appreciate everybody's flexibility. As you have just heard from Mary Ott, we're going to move to hearing each of our youth panelists. This is the focus of our forum, in that there have been an array of discussions about understanding and preventing youth suicide. What there hasn't been is hearing the youth voices as a priority. And after we hear from each of our student panelists, we will then move on to the adult panelists, who will in fact respond to what they have heard through questions. I would first, and I'm going to only use first names and their school. And if there's a way of bringing them on, I appreciate that, Richard. We're first going to start with the Falmouth High School representative. Jack, I thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight and listening to all of us speak about our experiences with suicide, whether it's ourselves or other people that are that you've been affected by. So beginning in February of 2022, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. It's been a battle, both uphill and downhill. Since then, I've spoken with many therapists, and it seems that at times certain people were the right ones, but it changed, and that's something that's going to be always changing and that people don't understand. It's not always the right fit to start with. And so all through the spring last year, there were lots of changes in my personality and just my ability to even function as a person. Going into the summer, I really thought things were getting better and I felt good coming into my senior year this fall. But after the first 2 days of school my senior year, I began to become suicidal myself. And that was a really hard thing for me and for my family, I'm sure, and for everyone else that supports me. And it felt at that time that it would be just easier for me, for my family, for my friends, that if I wasn't here anymore. And I couldn't have been more wrong about that. So when I felt these thoughts and feelings, I joined a program through Mass General Hospital in Salem. It was a 2-week online program. It was all online due to COVID precautions and things like that. Usually it would have been in person. So they considered a partial hospitalization program. And during my time there, we spent 5 hours a day on Zoom, just like I am right now, both in group and individual sessions, working on ways to cope with depression and anxiety, working closely with medical professionals on medicine and getting medications all in order. It definitely wasn't easy being on the computer for 5 hours straight, especially just getting through the COVID pandemic and learning online for 2 years of my high school career. Like, coming back and having to do that again was kind of a not very good feeling, because I was looking forward to being in person and to experience human interaction again. I think my biggest takeaway from the program was that there are more people that care about you than you could ever know. And it still sets in every day when people say things to you. And I think that's the biggest thing, is if you see somebody that's struggling, just tell them like how much you care and how much you're there for them. And it doesn't even have to be like as straight up as that. It could just be as something like, you make my day better when I see you, or something along those lines. And so then after my program, which I missed school for 2 weeks because of, I joined what's called the Bridge program at school. Actually, one of the adult panelists, Katie Fouth, is the leader of the Bridge program. And it is a program in school that basically does what it's called. It bridges the gap between an extended absence and getting back into school. And it's both on the academic and emotional side of what it's like to be a high school student. And I really couldn't have done it without them. I really want to thank Ms. Fouth and Ms. Bradshaw and Ms. Mullane for everything that they've done for me. And even though I'm not a technical member of the Bridge program anymore because I've graduated, it is extremely valuable that they still support me, and anything that I need, they're there for me. And joining the Bridge program is kind of like joining a family. It's really like you become enveloped in this community that you might not know what all the other students are dealing with, but you all know that you're dealing with something. And it's just a place that fosters so much kindness and caring and compassion. And it's the reason I was a part of it is the worst thing in my high school career, but being a part of it has been the best thing that I've experienced during high school. One other thing that I'd like to talk about, I'm also lucky enough to be called the president of Massachusetts Pioneer Hope Squad. Hope Squad is a nationally recognized group that is main focus is in suicide prevention, and it works on changing the stigma around mental health and suicide awareness as well. At Falmouth High, we're the first one in Massachusetts, like I said. We've been selected by our peers as good listeners and people that exemplify qualities of positive role models in the school and are kind and have the character traits that are needed to support others. We're not looking to be the therapist for others, but we are there to kind of be the first people that you can talk to, because it's much easier to talk to a student than it is to a mental health professional or even a teacher. Sometimes that can be really intimidating for people, especially if you're in a tough spot. I know that I can personally agree with that. It's very difficult to speak up when you're feeling down and alone and hopeless. And that's all I have to say. Thank you all so much for listening. And this is a really important thing to me and to many other people. And I truly thank you for coming and listening and spending your time this evening with us.
Jack, thank you very much. What you've had to say succinctly is from your heart and from your experience, and also to know and hear from you that how much you have gained and the value, however difficult it has been. Again, thank you. With that, I would like to have Logan come forward from the Barnstable, representing the Barnstable High School. Logan, we thank you for being here and look forward to hearing your remarks. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and watching this. So I'm participating in this forum because in May of 2021, I was personally affected by the loss of my friend Nick Eastman by suicide. Losing a friend is awful, and it hurts even more when you feel like you could have done something to prevent it from happening. And it can be hard to think about what you could have done differently, but a good way to help stop this from happening again is to just try and put yourself in other people's shoes and imagine how they could be feeling. When someone seems to be constantly happy, you may not ever expect them to be feeling down, but you need to take everyone's feelings into consideration before you say anything that could be potentially harmful. Suicide has become a big problem in recent years due to COVID. These past few years have been really hard for everyone, and quarantine made it hard to live life normally and just created a lot of isolation. It also negatively affected many people's mental health, and it just made everyone feel really alone. And suicide is a really sensitive topic, so it can be hard to share your feelings of it, and it can be hard to talk about the loss of someone because of it. A lot of people don't want to say the wrong thing, so a lot of the time, stuff just goes unspoken, and that just makes the problem worse. I first met Nick in sixth grade. He was in my math class in my homeroom. He was one of the funniest people I've ever known, and he always made me laugh whenever we talked. He would sneak small but hilarious jokes to me during class and loud ones during lunch. I remember when I first texted him too. I don't even know how I got his number, but it just appeared in my contacts one day, and I assumed that it was my sister's friend who had the same first and last name as him, but I decided to text it, and it turned out to be my friend Nick, not my sister's. Later on in 8th grade, we got really close and would chat almost every day, along with our 2 other good friends. We had English class together along with many lunches, and we would always like share Instagram posts to each other and just like Snapchat and communicate over the phone. And he was always up to no good with his jokes, and I think that made it even funnier. He had the most infectious laugh, and anytime I heard it, I couldn't help but laugh along with him. He was always smiling, laughing, and making jokes, and I never knew him to be an unhappy person. So learning the news of his death really shook me up. We stayed friends throughout 8th grade, but then COVID hit, which brought some distance between us and many others. COVID was a hard time for everyone, and school never really felt like school. My teachers felt like strangers, and no one really had any motivation to do anything. It was hard to stay friends with some of the people who were once your best friends because of all the masks and social distance rules. Classes and lunches were always silent, and there was barely any interaction between students during class. I wish that I had stayed as close as I was with Nick, and I wish that I could have known he was struggling and been able to do something about it. When you learn that someone has passed by suicide, you start to think of all the things that you could have done. I remember when I first found out, I was in shock, and I got a text from my friend about it, and we both didn't think it was real. Later that day, it finally hit. The next day, I did not attend school, but they announced his passing over the loudspeaker. I and everyone who knew him was upset. The day after that, I went back to school and went with my friend who had a class with him to try and comfort him. There were counselors that said that they were there to talk if anyone needed it, and those close to him were exempt from some work for about 2 weeks, and then you were just expected to go back to normal. But 2 weeks is definitely not enough for anyone. Grief is not a straight line, and there are good days and there are bad ones. And I think that Nick's death was not properly handled by the school, because a lot of people think of the word suicide as taboo, and no one really knows how to deal with the thoughts of it or the death of a loved one because of it. It can be a really uncomfortable topic, and no one really wants to say the wrong thing. The school didn't want to say the wrong thing or mess up, so nothing was really done about it. But I think that it's better to speak out without the risk of messing up than just not do anything at all. Speaking about this is hard for me too, because I don't want to say the wrong thing either. And it's been hard to deal with this kind of loss, and even harder because it was this young. And I think what made it harder was that I never saw any warning signs Nick was always making jokes whenever he could and spreading his contagious laugh to everyone. I really wish that I'd known about his struggling. When something like this happens, you start to wonder what you could have done differently. I think that something that everyone can do to prevent this from happening again is just to check in with everyone. You may think that just because someone seems happy and is always smiling, that they're probably not struggling. And it's not enough to check on people just when you think that they're feeling down. You should just make an effort to check in with everyone whenever, even if they seem to always be happy. Because you can never know what's going on in someone else's mind, and this just makes it even more important to check in on everyone. No one should have to feel like suicide is their only way out, and no one should struggle alone. We all need to do something in order to prevent something like this from happening again. Thank you all for listening.
My goodness. Thank you, Logan. You have shared so much. You have garnered the attention of everyone on this forum today. Your important words of taboo, that whatever is in your mind about your memories, and in honor of your friend Nick, just said so much, and we have much to learn from what you have provided all of us. And what you said about grief, everyone grieves at their own time and for whatever length of time. And again, how wise you are, how wise Jack has been as well at this. And I would like to now turn to our next student panelist, who is representing Nauset High School. Sophia, we thank you.
Hi. I want to thank everyone for coming together tonight to talk about the importance of access to services to help prevent youth suicide. I wanted to start off with a poem I wrote in January 2020. Sometimes I think I'm cursed, that life is just a cruel game and I was chosen as one of the unlucky players, that by some bad hand, I was given nothing going for me. No talent, no purpose, no value. Everyone who says they care just seemed to leave me in the end. Everyone is better off without me. I think I might spend my entire life drowning in a glass half empty. Maybe I'm not cursed. Maybe I am the curse. I wrote that my freshman year when I was staying at an acute-based treatment center in Attleboro because I had tried to commit suicide a week prior. That is how I felt. Alone, unwanted, useless, and a waste of space. I genuinely thought that the people who loved me would be happier if I wasn't around. I'd been struggling with an eating disorder, crumbling friendships, major depressive disorder, and paralyzing anxiety. However, despite these very heavy feelings, I got straight A's. I was everyone's therapist friend that they went to when they needed support. And I lived off the idea of being the perfect student, the perfect friend, the perfect daughter. I bottled everything up in hopes that it would eventually go away. And then I exploded. I couldn't take being perfect anymore. I wanted everything to stop. And then when it got to be too much, I decided I was going to stop it. I tried to commit suicide twice over the course of 3 months and failed twice, thankfully, because now I have the opportunity to share my story. After both suicide attempts, I spent 2 3-week-long periods at the Attleboro Center with 11 other high school students who were struggling with mental illness. I made some of my closest friends here, began to learn ways to help myself when no one else could, and met some of the most inspiring adults that have guided me to find my purpose in becoming a social worker to assist youth just like me. But it wasn't easy. In the middle of my second stay, we were told that due to an unpredictable uprise of a deadly pandemic, we all had to be forcibly sent home, effective immediately. I will never forget the day the 12 of us were told that. Chaos erupted. You can say we were overreacting, but to us, it felt like we were given a death sentence. I mean, how do you expect anyone to heal in the same environment that made them sick? Within 3 days, I was back home being told about this thing called the coronavirus. My mom was still considered an essential worker, and at the time, I was only visiting my dad. I had to manage a lot of time alone, cut off from human contact. I sunk further into my depression, but promised myself for the sake of my family, I would not let them bury their 15-year-old daughter in the midst of a pandemic. The next year, sophomore year, I was officially friendless. Sure, I had people that I talked to here and there, but all of the close friends that had promised they would stick by me left, because for the first time, I wasn't the perfect friend anymore, and they couldn't take it. Hybrid schooling was really rough on me, and I spent the majority of my time focused on what I could control, my schoolwork and my healing. I learned a lot in that year and a half after my hospitalization about mental illness, healing, and myself. Here are a notable few. First, the fact that you're high functioning doesn't mean that your illness is any easier for you to deal with. It means it's easier for others to deal with. Don't let anyone tell you what you feel isn't as important or difficult. You know you better than anyone. You are the judge of what you go through. Second, you're not alone. It may feel like you are, but I promise you're not. There is someone out there, whoever that may be for you, that loves and cares for you. Mental illness can cause illusions of being isolated, but all of the voices telling you that you have no one are lying to you. The loneliness can be deafening, but there is someone there for you. You may not realize it yet, though. Third, it gets better. I know that's the most cliche phrase and it doesn't provide much comfort, but as someone that's been there, I can say that it gets easier. Time heals all wounds. If you reach out to those around you for support and get the help you need, little by little, the weight gets less heavy. I promise. In this speech, I was also asked to give advice to adults on how to better support the youth in their lives that are struggling. First, I ask you all to understand that mental illness is different for everyone. Just because what you think your child or student is going through isn't that bad, doesn't mean it doesn't feel like the end of the world for them. The most invalidating thing any adult can do to an adolescent struggling is to tell them that they're overreacting, that someone out there has it worse, and to just get over it. You may not understand what they are going through, but you don't have to understand everything to be supportive and empathetic. Secondly, form relationships with the youth surrounding you. Some of the best supporters in my life and the people that have kept me here are the teachers that I'm friends with, not just a student that they see for 2 hours every other day to learn information. Communication is key when it comes to being a supportive and welcoming person that children contemplating suicide feel they can go to. It should be one of your biggest priorities as an adult to show the adolescents in your life that you genuinely care for their well-being, regardless of whether they're a perfect student, friend, or child. Everyone wants to feel loved. Everyone wants to feel heard. No one chooses to feel suicidal. I encourage all the adults here tonight to reflect on themselves. Are you the person that people feel they can go to? Are you going out of your way to show that you care? Are you willing to listen and not speak, to be supportive, to put aside your own stresses to make sure a child knows that there is another way? If you find yourself not knowing the answer or feeling unsure, I encourage you to reach out to those who can provide some help or expertise. It is understandable to be overwhelmed and worried and not know how to fix things. Don't be discouraged. The best way to help your child or student is to help yourself first, so you can better support them. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just being sensitive to the situation and putting effort into trying to be supportive is enough. And lastly, for the youth out there that feel the way I described at the beginning of this speech, I want to leave you with these words from my favorite artist, Taylor Swift. You are not the opinion of someone who doesn't know you. You're not going nowhere because you have not gotten where you want to be yet. You are wiser because you went through something terrible, and you are the person who survived a bunch of rainstorms and kept walking. And that doesn't make you damaged. It makes you clean. Thank you.
Sophia, thank you. You have been heard by so many people that are on this forum, and that what is important is that one word summarizes your bravery, your courage, each of you, in being so honest. I am privileged now to turn the baton over, as with great appreciation of the student panelists and what each of them have said, is to now hear, with Jackie Lane having been able to join us as the moderator. And I can stand back and thank you, Jackie, as she asks the questions of our adult panelists from what each of you have heard from our unbelievable youth who have presented with their hearts and with their challenging experiences. Thank you, Jackie.
I just want to say, I did not hear the young people, but I had the privilege of seeing their essays prior. And as a person that works with parents a lot and is very, very concerned about the mental health of our young people, I can't thank you enough for being gracious to share your experience, because by talking about all of these things, that's what's going to help, and it's what's going to help others. So thank you so very much. So now we're going to move on to the adult panelists, and we're going to address some questions to them, and hopefully some of those questions will help what our youth said and answer some of their questions. So one of the things that I would like to do is our adult panelists, and I'm looking for them. Are they coming on? We have Senator Julian Cyr, who is from Massachusetts, and we're very lucky to have him because he has been so instrumental in pushing for mental health legislation and reform in the state, which we'll hear more about. We have Dr. Kim Mead Walters, who is the executive director of Sharing Kindness, as well as a retired primary care physician on Cape Cod for, I think, 30 years. We have Daniel Rodriguez, who is the director of substance use disorders for Duffy Health Center. And Duffy Health Center is a health center that deals with some of the very most needy people on the Cape. And we have Catherine Fausch, who is an adjustment counselor at Falmouth and the clinical coordinator of the Bridge program there. And Falmouth High School has been very, very proactive in trying to deal with the mental health and welfare of their children. So let's see, now we have to go to questions. And since I had so much trouble getting on, I'm a little shaky here, but
Jackie, I'm going to give you a breather for a second. It's Eileen. I just want to let everybody know, because we've been getting comments. Tara Vargas Wallace has been able to get on, and she will talk at the conclusion of our forum. Thank you, everybody.
I'd like to start with Senator Cyr. We have the first thing, I think, though, if you could give a quick summary of some of the high points in the act that was finally passed. I know we worked on this a lot prior to COVID, and then with COVID, things kind of got put on hold, but you were lucky and really pushed and got a very good bill through. Can you give us some highlights on that?
Sure, Jackie, thank you. And thank you all for joining tonight and your patience. I think this forum is evidence now more than ever that we need young people running things. I'm part of that, but we need young people running things. What I want to start actually by talking about is not policy, but is just, first of all, thank you to Jack and to Logan and Sophia, for sharing your story and the story of a lot of people in, right now who are young people. And this is something that I can very much relate to. I'm a lifelong Cape Codder. I grew up in Truro. I went to the Nauset schools. And I really was someone who, and still to this day, really struggles with anxiety and depression. That was never seen, right? Because, as Sophia talked about, I was that straight A, overachieving AP honors student. But I was deeply depressed and had very, significant anxiety and depression in high school that went undiagnosed. I didn't have much suicide ideation. How it manifested for me, I developed an eating disorder and had panic attacks. And a lot of this was about, because I was different, right? Because I was queer. And it's really disturbing and pretty unacceptable, right? So I graduated from high school in 2004, which I guess now is kind of ancient history. It's nearly 20 years ago. But it's really unacceptable, right? That the conditions that were present, or the lack of services that were present, right, when I was in high school and in middle school, that while we'll talk about all the things that we're doing, that not a lot's changed. And if anything, that things have gotten worse in many ways, right? That we know, that 10% of high school students have considered, have made a suicide attempt, according to CDC data. 20% of LGBTQ youth, the fact that LGBTQ youth, are 4 times more likely to have attempted suicide, that 1.8 million youth aged 13 to 24, is estimated by the Trevor Project, have made a suicide attempt who are LGBTQ, right? That's not how this is supposed to be going. And when you dig into these numbers and look at, people's experiences, the gaps, and particularly the disparities that we saw in my generation, particularly among LGBTQ youth and also youth of color, and also for women and young women, are so persistent. And so I say all that, right, to one, ground the fact that that this was an experience that I could very much relate to. I didn't really get much behavioral health help until I went to college. And really, I should say I'm someone who has been able to access mental health care. And the mental health care I've been able to access, right, has made all the difference in my experience and in my life. And really, I think has, therapy and occasionally also, relying on medication has enabled me to, kind of manage my depression and my anxiety and do things that I never dreamed that I could. What if you would have told me when I was a senior at Nauset High School that I would be the state senator before I was 30? That would have blown my mind. So I just want to share all that because I think it's really important that we just don't view this as like, all right, we have a student issue and an adult issue, but the adults you're hearing from tonight, and probably everyone on this call has struggled and grappled with their mental health at some point in their lives. And that I think it's really important to be grounded in this work, right? That this isn't just sort of a generational problem or sort of a specific issue, but this has been a very persistent big challenge. So Jackie, I know I took up a lot of airtime there on that, but I just wanted to really, talk about this. I think the good news from a state policy perspective, and I'll be brief on this, is, for years, and when you talk to someone like Jackie and Kim, and Catherine and Daniel, people who've been doing this work for a long time, mental health treatment and services were never sort of on the tippy top priority list of sort of any power brokers. That has changed and changed quite significantly. Senate President Karen Spilka, who runs the Senate, right, so the leader of the Senate, her number one priority is reform of mental health. And we've had great partnership from the governor, from the House and the Speaker as well. And so we've been very persistently working to reform access to mental health care, doing everything from guaranteeing annual mental health wellness exams, enforcing longstanding laws in the books that require insurance companies to provide parity in their coverage for mental health and physical health, really trying to solve the emergency department boarding crisis. You heard from, I think Jack and Sophia, right, who both had to access care in part through emergency departments. At any given time, we have dozens of young people in the state who are waiting for treatment in an emergency department. It's unacceptable. And then a whole host of other ways we have interventions from the establishment of 988, reforming 911 and alternative response, having emergency service providers who can respond in an emergency, looking at culturally competent care, right? It really makes sense that you have mental health providers who look like and can speak to the people they're serving. 90% of those providers in Massachusetts right now are white. And then, really looking at technical assistance to schools. So we're doing quite a bit. And all of this was contained in the Mental Health ABC Act, which both the Senate and the House passed, and we finalized on the last day of our session. It was a bill I was really proud to be the lead author on in the Senate. So we were doing a lot. We have a lot more to do, in part because this hasn't been considered a priority. So I'm really honored to be able to be working on this and sort of trying to change the status quo here. So there's a lot that's coming, but also it can't come soon enough. So I can dive into that a little more if folks want, but I want to make sure folks hear from Kim and Daniel and from Catherine.
We may come back to that, Senator, because one of the things we'd like to say, where are we going from here and what can we do specifically on the Cape? Because we know the Cape has its own set of issues too. So, and that's another reason we're lucky to have someone that's so into mental health at the State House for us. I'd like to move on to Dr. Kim Mead Walters now. I met Kim, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and she has her own story. Not only is she a professional and working on this, but she has a lived experience too. And so Kim, maybe what would you say to these young people?
Thank you, Jackie. First, I'd like to extend a personal thank you to Jack and Logan and Sophia for starting tonight's conversation. It's so important to all of us to hear your voices. So thank you. There are so many important pieces to share. I really want anyone attending this event to understand that since 2007, there has been a 70% increase in youth suicide, 70% increase in youth suicide. That suicide is the second leading cause of death for our youth. That, and I want to echo Sophia here. She said, no one chooses to feel suicidal. I want everyone to know that the vast majority of young people that we lose to suicide don't want to die. The vast majority of young people we lose to suicide don't want to die. They need their pain to end. And as a society, we need to address the causes of deep pain. And I also want to add to attendees that you cannot make someone suicidal by asking, but you can miss an opportunity to help someone who is suffering or even to save a life if you don't ask. The most recent CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's conducted every 2 years, it was released last month. And this is just a different lens for the numbers that Senator Sear brought up. On any average day, 3,700 students in the US attempt suicide, day after day after day. Each year, we lose nearly 7,000 students to suicide. And that's one suicide for every 175 attempts in this age group. So clearly, many more students have suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts than the number of students who die from suicide. And that's important to know. I'm a suicide loss survivor. I lost my 16-year-old son, Jeremy, to suicide 6 years ago, and one is too many. I think a really worrisome take home from the recent CDC survey is that the number of students across every racial group, every ethnic group who felt persistently sad or hopeless has increased. And the other piece I want to add about the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey is that they noted the importance of school in fostering sound youth mental health cannot be overstated, that there's a strong correlation between students who feel more connected in school environments, great to have things like the Bridge program, and their academic performance and their mental health. Statistically, we know that the summer months in December, the months when our students spend more time at home, are actually protective against suicide. The risk increases in the fall and spring semesters. So building a school's capacity to support student mental health, it's imperative. According to the American School Counseling Association, currently less than 20% of students who die from suicide accessed their school's counseling center as a resource. And I applaud Senator Sear for his work on the Mental Health ABC Act In particular, I'm excited about the school-based telebehavioral health pilot program that's contained there. It's clearly a move in the right direction. And I would want everyone attending to know that we all have a role to play in suicide prevention. I encourage both students and parents to take a suicide prevention course such as QPR, which is short for question, persuade, refer. CPR, we all know now, that helps us with a heart health crisis, right? QPR helps us handle a brain health crisis. Thanks, Jackie.
One of the things that we know an awful lot about guns, and I will admit that I heard Kim do a presentation in another job I had this afternoon, and she gave some statistics about the number of kids, youth that die with guns. And it was interesting because, as I remember, Kim, the statistic in Massachusetts was less than in many other states. Can you address that?
Absolutely. So across the country, per AFSP, that's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, across the country, 53% of all suicides involve a firearm. In Massachusetts, it's just 22% of all suicides involve a firearm. We have stricter gun control laws than many other states, and suicidologists will tell us time and time again that reducing access to lethal means reduces the number of suicides. In addition to gun control laws, reducing access, I want to add, also means making sure firearms are unloaded, locked, and secured when not in use. And ammunition should also be stored at a different location. A little bit of worrisome news. A study in Contemporary Pediatrics earlier this month reported not only that overall youth suicide increased during the pandemic, but there were also more youth suicides by firearm than expected. So overall, suicide involving a firearm increased by 2% during the pandemic, but in our youth, firearm suicide increased by 15%.
Do you think that's because the youth were home and they were kind of shut in and had more access, perhaps? That's kind of scary. Kim, could you just give us a brief summary of what Sharing Kindness, the organization that you founded a few years ago, does?
Absolutely. So we are working on suicide prevention 4 different ways. The first form of prevention, Jack mentioned earlier, it's a school-based peer suicide prevention program called Hope Squad. And we are so excited about this. It was developed 20 years ago. It's now in 41 states and more than 1,600 schools. And yes, Falmouth was the first school in the state of Massachusetts. Not only do the number of suicides drop at Hope Squad schools, there's also a decline in stigmatizing language, and there's an increase in help-seeking behavior. What we hear from Hope Squad schools is that it changes the culture of the school. The data collection for Hope Squad is strong. In Hope Squad schools, more than 30% of students in the guidance office are referred by Hope Squad members. And I want to add that this is important for families to know, and teachers. 50% of students don't disclose their suicidal ideation or plan, but of the 50% who do disclose a plan, most often they tell a peer. So a peer suicide prevention program like this really works. Our organization pays for training the advisors, the schools pay for the licensing, and I'm really excited to add that Barnstable High School and Cape Cod Tech have both signed on, and we're doing trainings this summer. So Falmouth led the way on this one. The second form of prevention is forums just like this. We have documentaries for schools supporting mental health, including the impact of racism on mental health, impact of bullying, impact of social media, outside of anxiety, depression, and suicide awareness documentaries. The third form of prevention, we founded the Suicide Awareness Walk. This year is our 6th walk. We had more than 400 registered walkers last year, more than 18 resource tables, including tables for our at-risk folks in our community. Senator Sear has spoken at the last few walks, and we hope to see him again in May. So all funds raised at the walk remain here on the Cape and Islands to raise suicide awareness. And the fourth form of suicide prevention for sharing kindness, we have clinician-led peer grief groups. We follow something called the Dougie Center model. Unaddressed grief is a risk factor for suicide, as Logan so aptly said in her words on grief. And because of the funds raised at the Suicide Awareness Walk, we are able to offer all of our peer grief programming free of charge. No charge ever. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kim. As I said, I've been really fairly close to what Kim has been doing for a while now. And I think the peer thing, I think we've come up with the fact that youth talks to youth more than they're going to talk to adults. And I think that a strong program to get peers into the schools, even down into the middle school, because kids, I think that you would probably find out that a number of the suicides that have happened with young people, some of their kids, the friends have known that there was an issue, but the adults didn't. Even the parents didn't sometimes. So I think that's really very, very important thing for us all to remember.
Absolutely. Jackie, may I add that on the Hope Squad, they actually have a curriculum for elementary school that's really a social emotional learning curriculum where they build resilience and other skills that they build connectedness, things that are ultimately suicide prevention as the students age. It becomes a suicide prevention program through the middle and high school years.
The other thing from the work that NAMI has been doing with schools, we have discovered that the kids in the schools they know more than sometimes the teachers and parents think they know. And sometimes I think the teachers and parents are trying to protect children by not exposing them to certain things. And I think the kids already know these things. And so it's very, very important that we get in on the bottom and build up resilience and build up that communication, especially the peer communication. Thank you very much, Kim. Mr. Rodriguez, you work in an organization that deals with some of the most needy people, I think, on the Cape. Duffy does remarkable work, and I know more about what Duffy does, truthfully, for the homeless in Hyannis because I am so involved with the police and the CCIT segment of the unit, the community crisis units and all of that. So tell me about the program that you're directing.
Well, first and foremost, it's a privilege and honor, obviously, to be here alongside the panelists here, as well as, I can't stress enough, like the others have said, the courage it took, obviously, Sophia, Logan, and Jack to be able to share their story and to really bring their expertise into the room. We're here as professionals, they're here as experts in a lot of ways. So thank you for that. Jackie, in the work that we do at Duffy Health Center, you're correct. We primarily serve adults here on Cape Cod, our most marginalized community members. So we do serve folks who are unhoused, unstably housed, obviously struggling with, at times, profound mental health and substance use struggles. And as part of that, we clinically oversee a program that is run in unison with Behavioral Health Innovators, BHI. It's our Recovery Build Alternative Peer Group, which serves 13 to 17-year-olds that are experiencing substance use disorder. And also within our clinic, we are the only certified health center on Cape Cod that provides medication for opiate use disorder for adolescents in the 16 to 18 bracket, which has become a need in our community, especially given trend patterns and usage patterns for when our adolescents are starting to struggle with some substance use issues. With that being said, originally, when we started our alternative peer group, it was really much so focused on substance use disorder, right? How do we support our teens that are, experiencing some form of misuse or more complex substance use. And, throughout COVID and especially post-COVID, we've had to take a really, really kind of like deep look at what program and supports we were providing, because we had never shifted or said that we weren't treating the mental health aspects with our substance use treatment, but the intensity of mental health challenges in the past few years has just skyrocketed, and we've seen that with the participants that are coming to our program. So with our alternative peer group program, even though the focus is still centered in many ways around substance use and misuse, we are working very hard with our participants really to focus in on their trauma, their mental health, their depression, their anxiety, looking at the socioeconomic factors that are present in their life that really promote unhealthy responses to the stress that they face, and being able to bolster with our community allies the skills and the tools necessary to challenge those emotions that our teens are facing, while also working with our community partners to work through some of those systematic issues that are underlying why a lot of our participants, our teens, are experiencing increased anxiety, depression, etc. So I can't stress enough in a lot of ways, the importance of us as a Cape community becoming a recovery-based and wellness-based community, right? So not just looking at how do we create better access to certain levels of care, but how do we as a larger community really create a space where we can be very open, honest about these conversations. We can, welcome in a very endearing and real way, feedback from our children who may start to feel comfortable sharing some of the experiences that they're having related to increased anxiety and depression. And then from there, as others have said, what do we do with that information once we have it as providers, loved ones, friends, to ensure that we can kind of nip it in the bud and be proactive in responding to increasing stress that obviously our adolescents have.
Senator Sear mentioned specifically, I believe, well, certainly LGBTQ, and also people of color or different. Do you see, what is the mix that you see in the young people that you deal with? Is it, how would you classify it? You see that?
So it's a really good question, and we know statistically that Black youth are at higher risk of suicide. We know that Black girls are at higher risk of suicide, and as Senator Sear and others have shared, folks within the LGBTQ plus communities also are at higher risk. And I want to say something about that first, but to answer the question, I think that what we should really be asking in a lot of ways is who has the ability to access our services, right? So we do in our program, see a lot of, we serve a lot of our youth who identify as white. We have had an increase of participants who are in the LGBTQ plus category, which has been incredible to be able to offer that resource and to be able to build off of what we've already had in place. But again, the question is, how do we best serve these populations? Because we know that there's a lack of resources on Cape Cod for our youth, but looking at culturally humble and equitable resources for our teens and for our adults as well, I think is a really important part. That is where I think that the shift needs to happen in a lot of ways, is not just looking at how do we get it, but how do we get it in a way that promotes wellness for everyone who lives obviously on our peninsula.
Well, one of the things that at NAMI that we've tried to shift is the idea of mental wellness versus mental illness. I mean, we need a mentally well community, and that, of course, one of the big things that we think about, because we're not clinicians, but messaging and talking about it, getting the word out. We have to normalize the conversation about all of these issues. And if we normalize the conversation, just like we talk about somebody that has a heart issue or somebody, I remember a long, long time ago when I was young, which was a long time ago, there were people that talked about the big C. You didn't say cancer because that was almost a death sentence. And, you know, people would, and I think sometimes people were almost shunned when they had cancer. Not that it was contagious, but there was just this thing about it. And we've overcome that. And we need to overcome all the things that have to do with mental health, including discussions about suicide and opening up those discussions, because as long as something is kept under the rug or swept under the rug, we're not going to get there. So all of you are really doing that. And of course, we go back to our 3 young people that spoke today, that they went out on a limb and they spoke about it to a large audience. And that type of communication that we're doing here is very, very special. One of the things I do want to add, and this is maybe opening up a bit of a can of worms here, we have very few beds on the Cape. In fact, for anyone at this point, I believe under 18, we don't have a recovery bed on the Cape. Gosnold, I think at this point is still at 18. I have the rumor that if they get their new hospital opened, it's going to go down to 16. So when you're running a program like you're running, what's the next step? What do you do? How do you deal with that, for instance?
I think that's a really good question. And I know that others on this panel have worked really hard to assess what our needs are and, you know, figure out interventions and solutions. Again, I look at it, I'm a social worker by trade, right? And I'm really excited one day to work alongside Sophia, who now has said that she's going to become a social worker. So soon we'll be at the same table. But I think what we really need to look at again is what is the continuum, right? What is the continuum of care for these services? Because prior to coming to Duffy Health Center, I worked at our local area hospital on maternity and pediatrics, and was the person who was supporting families and young adults in trying to find those beds. And the reality is that not only is there a lack of those resources on Cape Cod, but in Massachusetts, and as Senator Sear had said, the boarding crisis is a major issue. And when you have anyone, let alone a child or an adolescent who's sitting either in the emergency room or in on the pediatric unit of one of these hospitals for days upon weeks on end, trying to find a placement, that's just not acceptable, right? And then to go to a treatment program to, again, stabilize, as we would call it in a lot of ways, just to, you know, kind of get on a better footing, and then returning back to the community without additional supports that are unique to the person that we're trying to serve, that's incredibly problematic, right? So even just hearing Jack share that, you know, his option was to do remote group post return to the community, not acceptable, right? So how do we again build a culture of wellness here on Cape Cod, so then that way we can promote success rather than bringing folks back into the vulnerabilities that obviously they left with as they had transitioned out of our community into a higher level of care.
Thank you very much. We have Katie Faust, who is very I've known of her for quite a while, and I've always thought of Falmouth as being pretty advanced as a school system in their attitudes toward mental health. So what do you see happening in the schools right now as far as mental health?
I will. Thank you so much. And I also just want to say, Jack, Logan, Sophia, you are all absolutely incredible. And I'm honored to be a part of this with you as young people that are ready to speak out and be open and honest, because I think that's what is really lacking in our world is open honesty and people being transparent. And I think the more stories told, the more people can be touched, the more it normalizes struggles and real life. So thank you. What you just said is so true about Falmouth High School. I have been in education for 23, this is my 23rd year as a classroom teacher, special ed teacher, and now a mental health clinician within the schools. Lucky enough to run the Bridge program. The Bridge program is based off a model that started in Brookline High School about 15 years ago, and it's called BRYT, Bridge for Resilient Youth in Transition. And it's currently in about 160, 170 high schools in Massachusetts. It is phenomenal. And it is that community-based feeling within a school to support not just students that leave hospitals and have to get back to high school, but students that are heading that way and are really red flagged, through their guidance department as needing much tighter knit community to really monitor them, give them academic and mental health supports. So Falmouth High School, so I've been in 10 schools, 3 countries, 3 states, and Falmouth High School is by far, I've been here now for 8 years, they are just right on the front lines. And from every administrator that I've worked with in my school to the superintendent, assistant superintendent, that is what a school needs, because as much as I'm inspired, I need the people above me. We all know how the school systems work, and that is everything in Falmouth, to have that support of my guidance director to my principal. It's just phenomenal. So I think that is why Falmouth is where we're at, because of that. So you asked, what am I seeing? I am seeing a lot of struggling teenagers that are starting to be willing to talk. And, the bottom line is they all want to feel connected. And that's what these programs in high schools, the Bright Network, does for students. It gives them a space within the school. It's not a separate program. It is a general ed program. They end up being back in all of their classes, but they have this nest to land in a high school. It's sort of like a cozy home feeling within your high school. I think Jack said that, a family feeling. So that is huge. So that I'm seeing that in my high school. I'm seeing that really change students that might be going to a hospitalization. It can prevent that from happening.
How do you think, we have talked with quite a few schools recently, and they've been asking for help. How do you feel that COVID, what has that done to this generation of kids?
Yeah, I think we're all seeing that as the years continue, more kids those years were so crucial, and they were not connected to peers. They were alone. They weren't interacting face to face. And I think that has really done some damage that we're all kind of swimming upstream to fix together.
It's kind of interesting. This morning, as I mentioned, we've been doing our police training this week and next week, and we opened it with Dr. Stuart Ablum from Mass General Hospital, who is the head of Think Kids Collaborative Problem Solving, and which has been done in some of the school districts on the Cape. And he made the statement, which I find very, very scary, because the police asked him, and he said, quite frankly, we're going to be seeing the results of the pandemic for a couple, 3 generations, that it's that type of thing, that it's just, so I guess what I'm saying is, and I think it's the same in schools from what I'm hearing, COVID supposedly is sort of under control. We're not wearing masks. We're out here meeting people, except right now we're on a Zoom call. But and I'd rather have you all in person, believe me. But what we're seeing is that the world just didn't start up again. It's like pulling teeth to kind of get back on track. And somebody I was talking to yesterday said, yeah, in fact, she was a psychiatrist. She said something to the effect, yeah, it feels sort of like the wheels came off the wagon. We're kind of trying very hard to get back. And I think probably some of the people that were even the most affected were our young people. And I keep thinking, because somebody else brought this up to me, do you realize the kiddo that was in 6th grade in March of 2020 came back to school a couple years later and is a freshman in high school without going through that delightful middle school experience that we all love so much. But when you think of that time of growth and development that kids, and we're seeing suicide ideation, to go back to that topic, with younger children all the time. And you know, we've got a call now and then, and somebody was a policeman took somebody to the hospital who was 9 years old and had suicide ideation. I mean, that is kind of shocking to us. So everything that the schools can do is wonderful, and there are programs out there. But again, as you said, you know how schools operate, and it takes a while to get through those layers to get things. And the schools that I've worked with, who have been very lucky, the ones that we've been successful with, have had, it started at the top with the school superintendent. The school superintendent has to buy into this, and the director of student services has to buy into it. And apparently Falmouth has been very successful, because pre-COVID was when I knew you. And and I've been in that little room you're talking about.
Yes, you have.
Yes, I have been in that room a long time ago.
I believe that was our first year of the Bridge, of the Bright program.
Yeah, of trying to do something. And so I applaud you.
And now the Hope Squad, that is the new thing this year. And that is the peer-to-peer piece that, you know, we're already seeing great kids from grades K to 12 connecting with each other to spread the message that we're all humans and we all have things going on, and that it's okay to share.
No, it's okay not to be okay.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's been one of our slogans, and I think it's even more important now. And that goes for all ages. We're talking about youth, which I find, in fact, NAMI is going to be concentrating on youth in its strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years, because I feel that our youth are in trouble. They've been very affected by COVID, and we really need to, because they're our future. The youth is our future, because even Senator Sears getting older now. He was our youth. He just said he's getting older.
Hey. No. The good thing on Cape Cod is you're, you know, what middle age runs till 65 or something like that. But
oh, I hope it runs even longer than that, because I'm older than that. And I'm still going, believe me. But
we love it.
Yeah, I don't know if we have, how much time do we have?
Jackie, I'm going to interrupt. We actually can go, if everybody can, till 8:15.
Oh, great, because I think there's a lot of good.
We got a late start because of technical issues.
Yes.
And we definitely want to hear from Tara Vargas Wallace.
Yes.
As
And
well.
that's at the end too. So I think that, where are we going on Cape Cod with this? Do we have hope that we're doing the right things, that we have a momentum going, that we're being progressive down here? We're kind of our own little world in some ways. We're different than some places. And we're harder to serve in a lot of ways. I know that when agencies come here and they say, oh, well, the Cape, there's that many people. Well, they don't realize that there's an 80-mile span there to cover, and there's one road that goes through it. So I remember when Bay Cove came down to do the emergency services, they're going to operate out of Hyannis, and I took them all around the Cape, and I said, if you really want, and they said they would be on site in an hour for anybody. And I said to them, well, then you'd better have an office in P-Town, one in Orleans, one in Hyannis, and one in Falmouth, and then you might make it. Not in the summer though, probably. So it is a hard area to serve, and it's a very diverse area. And I think that sometimes
Jackie, I know I'm interrupting, but there was a question to what you just said.
Okay.
In the chat, that there's a curiosity from the adult speakers who have worked with students who have passed away from suicide on the Cape. How did the recovery of youth, and this was heard especially from our student panelists, how were the students who've experienced a friend's loss. How did that get addressed? Or even knowing that someone had been extremely suicidal?
Well, that's a very good question for this panel, because there's some people on it that I would definitely refer people to. Kim, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll start. I want to say that in the state of Massachusetts, there's actually no law that says a school has to have a suicide prevention education program for students, or a prevention or postvention policy. And I'd love to see that change, because we're really asking, what is the postvention policy when there's been a suicide loss? What is the postvention policy at the school? And I can tell you about my personal experience after my son's death. I think that we heard from Logan, the student experience at the high school when her friend died from suicide was not optimal. I think a great answer to this question is peer grief support. And that's something that our organization is actively working with schools. So in addition to Hope Squad, peer grief support, it's trauma-informed, grief-informed support for peers.
Katie, have you had any experience with that in Falmouth?
Yes, we have had students get together to form groups that our mental health clinicians that work at the high school have met with. The struggle is getting kids to commit to a group, to be honest, and have the traction that it takes. And I know that the district is working with Cape Cod Grief, a woman who runs Cape Cod Grief. So there's that. And then there's also that the clinicians that work within the high school offer groups as needed to students.
So it is being recognized.
Oh, definitely at Falmouth, yes.
Yeah.
And if I could piggyback off that, first off, I have to say, for the folks who have put their questions in the chat, 1,000,001 incredible questions to be addressed. And this, in my viewpoint, is a kind of a taster and appetizer of a much longer discussion about how we obviously make cultural changes on Cape to address the needs of obviously our teens and our children. But a couple just small points. You know, there was a question of how, as adult providers who, having had an experience of losing a patient or a student or someone, how do we build our own resilience? And I think I will not speak for the rest of the panel, but I can say from personal experience, your soul gets ripped open, right? And a part of this work is figuring out how, as individuals, we find our ability to get through those trying times. And I know that what I've seen is the resilience of the loved ones around them and the students and friends, their health and wellness, and how that grows over time provides me health and wellness in myself, just to see them kind of, continue to thrive after having such a significant loss. And the other thing that was way earlier in the night in the chat was, a question of someone said they have an 8-year-old child and they're concerned about how do you work on preventing, suicide in an adolescent. And that is such a loaded question, but I think one of the ways in which we can do that I think ultimately answers some of the questions to the action side of things is, we talk about open dialogue. We talk about having conversations about risk factors and the things that lead to higher rates of suicide among our population, right? Isolation, socioeconomic status, historical trauma, familial trauma, all of those things. And I can tell you, as someone who has experience and has a 6-year-old in an elementary school, I've already started talking to my children, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, about our family's makeup around mental health, right? What are our family's vulnerabilities? What was my history? Doing it age appropriately, but how do we start protecting our young folks earlier? So then that way it's not oops, here we are and we've gotten to this crisis, but we've had conversations up to this. So then that way we can start to, again, promote open dialogues sooner rather than later.
I think one of the interesting things that's happening right now, I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been reading Gabor Mate And I've been studying Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, who's the trauma center in Texas. He also comes and works at Mass General with Stuart Ablam often. And it's the whole studying of very early childhood trauma. And an awful lot of kids have traumatic experiences. They're even talking about prenatal trauma at this point. And there is a direct correlation between people that had early childhood trauma and people that actually died by suicide in their 40s and 50s. So trauma, apparently, according to all these studies, actually, remember, brain development is taking place at a very rapid pace in the first couple, 3 years of life. And when there are traumatic things that happen, sometimes that wiring, or whatever you want to call it, gets messed up. And so we're learning more all the time, and all of these things relate. And again, it all goes back to having a mentally well community, and it goes right straight through. And but I've been fascinated with this whole bit of what the studies that they're doing on early childhood trauma. And so when you talk about that, maybe that child that's kind of unruly in first grade, and the thing is, it's not what's the matter with you, it's what happened to you. And I think that's a good way to look at it, probably. And then, of course, I just had my 2 hours with Stuart Ablam, and it's kids do well. Kids do well, not it's skill versus will. In other words, the kid isn't doing well, it's not because the kid doesn't want to do well, it's because the kid doesn't have the skill sets to do well. So if we adjust some of that thinking, I think we'll come much closer to a mentally well community. And then we have people like Senator Sear that are pushing as hard as he can to get equal. And I think that's a big thing. It's, you can get mental health if you pay for it, but it's the thing getting back to parity and all of those things. Parity, please, Senator, wasn't parity passed during, I think that was one of the last things Ted Kennedy did, wasn't it?
Yeah, so when we talk about parity or mental health parity, what we're talking about, right, is requirements for insurers to have an equal process by which they determine benefits for physical health or for physical, medical, surgical health and behavioral health. And Massachusetts has had parity laws in the books, for almost 2 decades. And then at the federal level, it was actually Senator Kennedy's son, then Representative Kennedy from Rhode Island, who really was a big piece in getting the federal parity law through. What we've realized, though, in Massachusetts, right, is that parity was not being enforced and not being realized, right? And so a big part of this Mental Health ABC Act is related to, frankly, very strong penalties and requirements for payers, insurers to demonstrate that they are truly adhering to parity, because they frankly have not been, and we've not sort of enforced that. I think there was a question earlier about kind of where do we go sort of from here? And there's a whole host of work needed to be done around alternative response. And Jackie will probably talk about this tomorrow at the training that NAMI is doing for law enforcement, but a lot of work around alternative response. What we're also trying to do is figure out create like a new doorway that folks can walk in through that's not the emergency department. And so community behavioral health centers have actually been launched in Massachusetts just recently. And we have one in Hyannis operated by Bay Cove. There's also one on Nantucket operated by Fairwinds, which is an island-based organization. We fought to make sure island-based organizations were doing this work. And then one in Martha's Vineyard as well, through Martha's Vineyard Community Services. And the idea is that this is an alternative in a location where families and people in crisis can go, and behavioral health crisis can go for help. Because often in the emergency department, you are, potentially maybe you're stabilized, but you're just sitting there waiting for a bed. And so as we look to implementation of, and ramping up these community behavioral health centers, looking at 988 as well, right? Having one number where people can go. I think in the school-based front, I really view, I think schools are really great locations where you can provide care. But I think we also have to be honest that we already ask our schools to do so much, right? So if we just sort of say, all right, now you have to do this, now you have to do that, it's just going to be another unfunded mandate that's not realized. And so you'll have a situation where even the ratios we have for school nurses, for instance, aren't enforced and are kind of meaningless. So I'm a big fan of efforts that you say, all right, the school, we've got a captive audience, if you will, right? A place where we're interacting most with young people and often their families. How do you embed community health centers? How do you embed providers who are, maybe don't work for the school, right? They're able to bill, the providers that work sort of independently from the school, right? But they're co-located there. The model Dr. Mead Walters was talking about around this telehealth pilot, where, you basically have telehealth services provided in the school, students going to, say, a therapy session, through telehealth. There's a staff person sort of managing that. So I think we're all looking there. The challenge, and then the big challenge across the region, though, and really now is we're funneling a tremendous amount of resources. We're putting an unprecedented level of resources, 400 million of the 5 billion in American Rescue Plan dollars that came to Massachusetts went to mental health. The only number that was higher than that was housing. So we're putting significant resources. We're changing the laws. The real challenge now is workforce, right? And no one has the workforce they need. So at any given time, a third of the inpatient psych beds in the Commonwealth are offline because we don't have the workforce to staff them. If you need a pediatric psychiatrist with Spanish language skills, which, a lot of families may need, you got to go to BMC in Boston. They barely exist in the state, right? So we've got to build a pipeline for this workforce. Daniel talked about sort of having a spectrum of providers from, prescribers all the way down to peers. But for us, right, and the barrier to this, and it all comes back to this issue here on the Cape, right, is housing. And so, if no one can afford to live here, particularly if you're a social worker or an addiction counselor or, a school nurse or someone who's providing this work in schools, right? And so this is where, from a Cape and Islands perspective, we are going to see and continue to see a tremendous influx in resources and policy change that's happening, that's paired with dollars. We're not going to be able to implement this here because we're not going to be able to actually house any of the workforce that we need. And so if we don't change direction on housing, we are not going to be able to actually have the staff to do these jobs, right? And so that's why zoning reform is crucial, rejecting this persistent NIMBYism that for too long prioritizes those people who own homes and the accumulation of their wealth at the expense of people like me and my generation who don't own homes and who rent. And so this is why we need installation of sewering and wastewater, and we need to, frankly, change our zoning laws and reject this sort of single acre, 1 acre lot zoning. I know you're like, how does it have to do with mental health? It directly relates to mental health. And actually, if you talk to mental health care providers in the region, if you talk to disability service providers, if you talk to the hospital, you know what those organizations are thinking about? They're like, all right, I'm going to have to build housing for my staff and my workforce. So as you think about this issue, housing and housing equity is interchangeably connected to it. So that's my nightly rant on housing. But I think for us, that's going to be the barrier. I think there's going to be tremendous change, the state level, potentially the federal level, tremendous amount of resources. The barrier here is we're just not going to have the workforce to implement it unless we change course pretty dramatically on housing. We're talking about thousands of new housing units need to be built on Cape Cod. And unfortunately, I don't think people have the stomach for it. And so, I know we've got a lot of older folks on this call tonight. You all attend town meeting. If you're voting against housing priorities and policies at town meeting, if you're voting against sewering, you're voting against mental health, and you're voting against, frankly, providing services to these young people and all the people in our community who are vulnerable and need this care.
Thank you very much. We see that all the time. Nobody has enough help. And if you go around the Boyne Rotary about 7:30 in the morning and look and you're going up off Cape, look what's coming on Cape. It looks like a Saturday morning in the summer because the workforce is coming from Wareham and New Bedford
Yep.
and all over.
47% of our workforce on Cape Cod, under a Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce study, commutes onto the Cape. 47%. I mean, I don't know what more information people need that we're in a crisis, but we're at the point where the municipality's failure on housing, the opposition to housing, is quite literally choking off our communities and the viability of us to have sustainable year-round communities, and is further exacerbating the crisis and the lack of services that young people and all of us are able to access. So anyway, that's my nightly rant on that topic.
Well, it's a very good one, and it comes right back in a full circle that all of these things are necessary in order to have a mentally healthy community, and we especially have to have mentally healthy youth because they're the ones that are going to replace us. And I think at this point we kind of have to wrap this up, don't we? Eileen?
Yes, we do. If we could bring Tara Vargas Wallace on, I think having heard our youth panelists and our adult panelists and the important comments they've made, I believe, Tara, your presentation as the Achievers Director with the YMCA will be very important. And then following Tara, for your Jackie, as a reminder, Marriott will make closing remarks.
Certainly. I want to thank you for the conversation. I think we hit a lot of good points here. So thank you for your time in doing this panel.
Okay, I guess I'm up.
Yes, you are.
Well, thank you all. This has been a very critical and powerful conversation. I was initially supposed to come on and welcome everyone and introduce folks, but we had some technical difficulties. So I'd just like to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for this partnership on this forum. It's very critical. We see with the Y Achievers program. So I am the Y Achievers Director. The Achievers is a national college and career readiness program delivered by the YMCA, which supports students in setting and reaching higher education and career goals. And our vision is for every middle and high school youth to have access to college and other career readiness resources through committed leaders and dedicated organizations in our community. The Achievers meet once a week in a group, in addition to special events and learning opportunities throughout the year. Students are guided through by staff and professionals in fields that they are interested in through workshops, world of work tours, and college tours. And currently we have about 27 students in our Achievers program, 98% of who are kids of color, students of color. And so we do see how critical these discussions are. So thank you to all of our speakers, to our panelists, to everyone in the audience, and especially to Sophia, Jack, and Logan for sharing your incredible experiences with us and helping us to see how very important it is to make sure that these resources are easily accessible and readily available to our community. With that said, you can find these resources on both the League of Women Voters website as well as the YMCA website. So please be sure to check that out. And again, thank you everyone, and especially to the League for helping us put this very important and critical forum on tonight. So thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you. Now, I believe that Marriott is going as you're the co-president, I believe, of the League on Cape Cod, and you're going to do some closing remarks.
Yes, well, I want to just echo Tara and all the thanks that she expressed for everyone, moderator, the audience, the panelists, the student panelists, the staff from the Y, and of course, the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod Area Health Committee. So, and we still want to thank Richard Utt and Diane Painter for their technical expertise in helping us despite overcome the problems we had earlier, and their support in planning, promoting, and hosting this very important program. And we'd like you to know that in addition, each student will receive an honorarium from the League in appreciation for helping to make the world a better place, which I'm sure they're going to do. And finally, once again, please post questions in the chat and include your email address so that we can answer them later. And we'll be putting up a slide of resources that you can look for some further information. And just want to thank everyone again and wish you all a good night.